It's time to get planting some spring bulbs. Hello again and welcome to part 7 of making a new garden. Now the original idea of this row of sunken containers was that it would form a line of herbs. That never really worked out the way I intended it to. The rosemary and the thyme did quite well, the parsley not so much, the chives really struggled. And the other thing is I think I didn't amend the clay that's in the containers enough, and another complication is that the cats and foxes will not leave these containers alone. They keep continuously digging them up. So it's time for plan B. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a permanent row of flowers. So I've got some spring bulbs to plant. I'm going to leave the rosemary and the thyme as it is because they seem to have done quite well here. And they're further away from the wall and the neighbour's tree, so I think that could be an issue as well. Now these containers do have holes on the side, but after I dug the clay out, I've added some extra drainage holes at the bottom, because my understanding is that the bulbs will rot if they're left sitting in waterlogged soil. So that's the clay dug up, and I've just noticed that there's an nasturtium has self-seeded in one of the 10-inch pots. So the mix that I'm adding in is my ingredients for the new pots is some rubble for the bottom, some perlite to break up the clay and aerate it, some of my own vermicompost, which is about 2 years old at this stage, and some horse manure. Now I made this job harder for myself than it needed to be, and I made it easier in subsequent mixes, but I put too much of the clay in the container to begin with. I filled it up about two-thirds of the way. It would have been better with a third or less than a half anyhow. I've made it difficult to mix the perlite all the way through. Lesson learned. I don't know what it is. It's almost like I need to do things the wrong way just to see what it feels like. Now I'm adding in the manure and of course there's some of the red wigglers in there. From time to time I've been asked, where do you get the worms from? Now of course you can buy them online. But if you're anywhere near a stables, go and have a look at the piles of horse manure there. You're bound to find some of the red wiggler type. So this is just getting thoroughly mixed up. I'm really not working to any sort of proportion. Again, I just go by, once it feels like it's nice and loose, then I think that's good enough. And the bulbs should be happy. And then I'm just going to make a hole in the centre. And I'm going to mix in the vermicompost. And that should make the bulbs happy, I hope. There's a worm that was in the vermicompost and it's about 2 years old. But where I have it stored, it's in a loose brick setup, so they're easily able to get in and out. So I expect he's come from one of the Dalek type bins up at the top of the garden. So that's the mix done. I've covered the additional drainage holes with some of the rubble, and now I'm going to fill the containers about 2/3 of the way with the new mix, and then I'm adding 2 tulips and 2 daffodils to each container. So the tulip bulbs are at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, and the daffodil bulbs are at 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. And then I've covered them up, and about 3 inches from the top I've put in a ring of muscari, and I'll probably add some more bulbs into the centre. I'm just not sure what yet. So I'm going to do the same for all 5 containers. And that's them finished. Once I had the containers topped up, I added a thin layer of vermiculite on top, and now the only other thing that I need to do is I'm going to have to put some of the green netting that I have across the container, because I guarantee tonight the foxes and cats will have this dug up, or they'll be using it as their personal bathroom, which has happened. I also found a shoe in one of these containers, so some poor girl is missing a left shoe. So obviously she left them at the back to dry and the foxes ran off with them. Now this was my literal container garden. Because we have the allotment now, I'm thinking I'm going to move most, if not all, of the containers down there. So this would be an ideal spot to grow some flowers. All during this year I've been growing spinach, lettuce, radish and carrots and rhubarb chard in these containers, but it's time for them to go now. They're sitting on a layer of well-aged horse manure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down those sticks. They're branches from the neighbour's overhanging tree, which I cut down, and I've just used them to make a sort of a border. So this side of the garden now looks like that's the strawberry bed which I had last year. This is the bed where the tomatoes were growing last year and the year before. Oh, sorry, this year and last year. And now it's going to be a permanent strawberry bed. I've added some runners in there. And this is now where the container garden was, but it's now going to be a flower garden. So I've just put a mix of bulbs in there. I've got allium at the back, and then little clusters of daffodils and tulips. They're the dwarf daffodils. And then anemone and muscari and crocus. So that's the layout of the bulbs. I'm just going to plant them now by pushing them. This is very loose soil now because it's clay and it's amended with horse manure and my own vermicompost. So I'm just going to push these in and then put a very thin layer of compost across the top, cover it with netting, and we'll see what happens in the spring. So this is part 8 of making a new garden. This left hand side is pretty much finished now, and then from the blackberry I've got 2 raised beds, and I've now got a permanent row of flowers. So that's part 8. As always, thanks for watching. Bye for now.